Today's daf, which is Ayin Vav, is a daf that requires hours and hours. So we'll try to do the best we can within the framework of a daf Yomi Shia. So we're up to Rav Ashi Omar, which is approximately 6 lines down from the top. So if you recall, we left it where we're trying to reconcile the two dinim of the Mishnah, the Reisha and the Sefer, that they shouldn't be contradictory. And we have now a new answer of Rav Ashi. And he's going to learn that the Mishnah is completely reflective of the Shita, of the view of Rabbi Gamliel, which means that Chezkas Haguf is stronger than a Chezkas moment. And therefore, we're always going to apply the principle of Mistachva Sadeyu according to Rabbi Gamliel. We're going to believe the argument of the Av and the Bas that the change in her situation in which she developed a mum took place as late as possible, which means after the Nesuin. And that's going to be enough, relying on this Chezkas Haguf, to allow her or the father to collect the Ksuba and be Motzi Momen Michezkasa, which means that we are completely rejecting the svara that Rava had put forward in the sugya yesterday of Kan Nimtzu V'Kan Hayu, which takes away and undermines the Chezkas Haguf. So again, the Mishnah is completely Rabbi Gamliel. Reisha, in the Reisha of the Mishnah, when the mum was discovered when she was still in her father's house, and therefore the ksuba belongs to the father. We have to assume that we're talking about a Nara here, and the Torah says B'nureh Beis Aviyah, and therefore he is the one who is collecting the ksuba. However, the argument in favor of the father collecting the ksuba is being put forth by the Bas. She's the one who really knows whether or not she had a mum earlier or it only developed later. So that's a case, argues Rav Ashi, of Mana li Ava biyadcha. In other words, she's putting forth a tainas bari on behalf of someone else, in this case on behalf of her father, who gets the ksuba, and not on her own behalf. And the rule of thumb is, according to Rav Ashi, the principle is that Chezkas Haguf could not support her unless she was tovas on her own behalf. But since she's being tovas on behalf of her father, that's why the Chezkas Haguf is not effective. So again, even though we're going to, according to Rabbi Gamliel, and Chezkas Haguf is so powerful that it overrides even a Chezkas Mama, but not in a case where the person who is really being Tovea, because she's only being Tovea on behalf of her father, he doesn't have the Chezkas Haguf. So you're splitting between two personalities. There's the personality of the Tovea, and then there's the personality of the Chezkas Haguf. In such a case, the Chezkas Haguf is not operative to support a claim. But in the Sefer, she already entered into the Shusabah, which means it's after Nesuin. If it's after Nesuin, then the principle of B'nureh Beis Aviyah no longer applies. And now she emerges with her own yad, her own tvias mamon, in this case for the ksuba, and therefore it's mana li biyadcha. She's claiming, and her claim is supported by a Chezkas Haguf, that the muma only developed at a later stage, and istakvos adeu, she has rights to collect the ksuba, and since her claim now is supported by a cheskes haguf, from Gamliel holds that the cheskes haguf will trump even a cheskes moment and allow her to collect the ksuba from her husband. So I think we could summarize this by saying that the Sefer reflects the Shita of Gamliel, and the Reisha is the exception because it's the father who collects the Ksuba in the Reisha, because it's before Nesuin, as opposed to the Bas herself. Esfei Rav Acha Parade Rav Avil Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha is now going to raise an objection from a brisa to Rav Ashi. Even Rabbi Meir, who says that once she enters into the Shus HaBaal and we discover that she has mumim, nevertheless the Baal is responsible to bring and adduce evidence to the effect that the mum was there all the time, even before he married her. But Mod Rabbi Meir b'mumim ha'ru'uyim lavo ima mibeis avia shala'av lahavirai. Now, what is this category called mumim ha'ru'uyim lavo ima? What this means is these are mumim that could have developed way back when, but they are mumim that are so concealed that you cannot reveal them even through a bedika. So it's quite possible that she already had these mumim way back when she was still in the house of her father, before she entered into the Beis HaBaal. And although the Baal was makpid, and he checked out to make sure she doesn't have mumim, he couldn't have possibly discovered these mumim because they're concealed. So they're re'uyim lavo imam beis avia. And the Baal is now putting forth the argument that maybe these mumim really developed before Erisin, but they're so concealed within our body that we couldn't have even discovered them. And therefore, raya, which I don't know exactly how the father is going to bring such a raya, but in theory, he's going to have to bring a raya that these mumim only were created, they only came into existence after the Erisin in order to apply the principle of Nistachva Sadeu and allow him to collect the ksuba. If he cannot prove such, and he has no evidence to support such a claim, then the Baal doesn't have to pay the ksuba. And this is a problem for Rav Ashi, because according to Rav Ashi, we say that Cheskas HaGuf is stronger than a Cheskas Mamon, and she has a Cheskas Guf which will delay and postpone the emergence of a mum. And therefore, according to the logic of Rav Ashi, it should not be ala av lahaviraya, but the Cheskas HaGuf would support the argument of the claim of the father, and therefore it should be the Baal who would have to prove that these mumim were ancient and they predated the Erisin. And she herself is claiming monoli biyadchahu, because we're talking about a case where it was after Nesuin. So she's demanding the entire ksuba for herself to put in her bank account. Her Cheskas HaGuf would now support her claim that we postpone the Leidas HaMumim until after Erisin. So why does this Bryce insist that even Rabbi Meir is modeh in this case, that the father has to bring a right? The Cheskas HaGuf is supporting her claim when she claims that she has a right to collect her ksuba, because it's after Nisuin. So Rav Ashi answers, Hochavayaskinon biyaseres. We're talking about a woman who has an extra finger or an extra toe. And this is considered a mum. He points out here that you take a look in the Mishnah in Bechoros that lists all the psulim that passel a kohen for avoda, and we know that those psulim also undermine and create the kedushin and make it into mekachtos in the case of marriage. And one of those is the case of yoseres, an extra finger. Now, such a mum for sure developed from the moment that she was born. She was born with an extra limb. And that's why the Baal is believed with his taina, this is a mekachtos. And therefore he's potter from ksuba. He doesn't have to pay the ksuba. The father would have to bring a raya. Once again, I asked the question, what raya could the father bring over here? I don't know. So that's where the Gemara is going to object now. Yoseres my raya maisi. And the answer is raya de rav and his payasu. He has to bring a raya that the husband was aware of the extra limb, and yet he accepted that and decided to marry and go ahead, and therefore he cannot claim today mekachtos on something that he knew from the beginning. That would be the only raya that the father could bring. But again, the reason why the father would have to bring this raya is because there's no cheskes haguf to support the claim that the husband has to pay the ksuba when we're talking about a mum which emerged with her birth, from the very moment of her birth. So surely she had this mum before he married her, therefore he doesn't want this marriage to be chal. It's a mekachtos. Didn't he check it out? The answer is that he did not check it out, unless the av can bring a raya dera that the Baal badak v'ra es ha'etzba hayoseres lifnei hanesuin. Okay, now we get to Shmuel. The rest of the sugya, the rest of the daf, is going to revolve around Shmuel. So let's say the following words of introduction. Shmuel is going to create an analogy between our Mishnah, where there's an argument of a claim of mekachtos on the part of the Baal when he discovers this mum, and another claim of mekachtos, or if not mekachtos, which we'll have later on in Amud Beis, another claim of a mocher and a lokeach. And Shmuel is going to say that in this battle between the mocher and the lokeach, we're going to establish which one of them has to bring the raya, and it's going to be based on the equation to our Mishnah about mum. Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel, hamachlif para b'chamor. We're talking about a kinyan chalipin, in which case the Bala Para is transferring his Para to the Bala Chamor, and the Bala Chamor is not only acquiring ownership over the Para, but he's also transferring ownership to the Bala Para on his Chamor. Moshach Bala Chamor is a Para. So what happened at this point? The kinyan of the Bala Chamor on the Para was complete, which would now mean that automatically through Kinyan Chalipin, his Chamor is now transferred to the Bala Para. Do you follow? In other words, Reuven owns the Chamor, and now he implemented a Kinyan on Shimon's Para. Shimon automatically and immediately acquires ownership on Reuven's Chamor the moment that Reuven acquires ownership on Shimon's Para. But what happened here? Lo hispik bala para limshok hesachamor. The bala para did not yet make a kinyan on the chamor. Ad shemeis hachamor. The chamor had gestorben. So now the question is, does this kinyan in which the Bala Chamor made a kinyan on the para, is that an effective kinyan? Because that kinyan could only be chal if in return, there's no gratis, there's no gift of it. In return for the para, the Bala Chamor has to transfer over his chamor, but the chamor died. So the suffix now, and basically this suffix is for both the Bala Chamor and the Bala Para. They don't know exactly when the donkey died, when the chamor died. So of course the Bala Para is going to claim, again with the Taina Shema, he doesn't know, that the chamor died before the kinyan was effectuated on his para. And therefore that kinyan on the para was not effective because the entire kinyan on the para was done under the understanding that the Bala Para is giving up his para in lieu of or in return for getting the chamor, but the chamor is already dead. So therefore, the Baal HaPara is going to claim that the chamor died before the kinyan on the para was implemented, and therefore the kinyan on the para is completely meaningless. On the other hand, the Baal HaChamor is going to claim that, again, he doesn't know, but maybe the chamor died after he himself did the Mashiach on the para. So at that moment that he did the Mashiach on the para, the Baal HaPara was kona his chamor. The fact that the chamor died afterwards, that's the problem of the Baal HaPara. That's nistach v'sadeh. Says Shmuel, based on our mission of Mum, al Baal HaChamor lahavi raya shohay chamor kayim b'shas Mashiachas HaPara. The Baal HaChamor, who implemented a Mashiach on the para and wants to claim that the chamor was still alive at that moment, and therefore the kinyan was effective, and therefore he wants to take over the ownership over the para, he has to prove that indeed his chamor was alive and kicking at the time of Mashiachas HaPara, and therefore the chalipin was valid. And now, if he brings that proof, which I doubt if he will, he can keep the para and maintain ownership on the para. If, on the other hand, he cannot prove that the chamor was still alive, he's going to have to return the para to its original owner, because even the Baal HaChamor himself is in a state of suffering. He doesn't know if he validly or legally acquired ownership on the para. And what that means is that although he has a chazaka on the para, his kinyan on the para was complete. He's now in physical possession of the para. That's not a halachic legal chazaka on Mammon, because he himself admits he doesn't know whether he really has claim to that para, because it could very well be the chamor died before the Mashiachas HaPara. And here Shmuel is going to insist on what we call a cheskas marakam. We know that the Baal HaPara owned this para from yesteryear until this moment. Now the Baal HaChamor is claiming, I legally acquired ownership on the para. But there's a suffix as to whether or not his claim is a valid one or not. And therefore, we're going to go back to the cheskas marakama, and we're going to leave the para in the rishus of the original owner, meaning the Baal HaPara. Even though right now the Baal HaChamor has already established a cheskas metaltalin, he's got a tfisa on the para, but no, we go back to the cheskas marakama. How does Shmuel know such a thing? Tana tuna kala, he knows it from the mission of kala, of a bride who exhibited a mum, and from the Mishnah, we're going to support Shmuel. And this whole sugya that we're going to learn, Be'ezer Hashem, is to try to understand what did Shmuel find in our Mishnah that would lead him to the conclusion that the Baal HaChamor is Yado al Tachtona, meaning he's the one on the bottom here. He's the one who's going to have to prove that his Chamor was indeed alive at the time of the Mashiach Sapor. Somehow Shmuel derived that conclusion from an analogy to our Mishnah Mum, and that's what we want to study. Hai Kal. Which din in the Mishnah, as far as the bride who all of a sudden exhibits a Mum, which din in the Mishnah would prove Shmuel and justify Shmuel deriving his conclusion that the Baal HaChamor is the one who's responsible to bring a raya, and if he can't bring a raya, then he has to return, cough up the parah, and return.